Okay, so I guess the time is now. Thanks everyone for joining me for happy hour. It is Friday, April 24th at 4 p.m. Once again, I was so busy preparing that I didn't have time to make a fancy drink, so I settled for gin and tonic. Today's gin is Solvig, something made right here in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area. It's very nice, very floral. And I've paired it with Fever Tree's lemon tonic water. Very light pour. I don't want to get too silly on y'all, but cheers. First things first, I do want to jump over and give a big shout out of thanks to Black Magic Design, as always, for sponsoring this series. And if you don't know Black Magic, you should. Everybody knows Black Magic. They make all this cool stuff. The A10 Mini Pro, they make switchers, they make cameras. They make things that are accessibly priced for folks like us. And they make DaVinci Resolve. And the DaVinci Resolve team, as always, deserves a big round of applause for doing such a great job with the software. And for just now dropping a new update, a new dot release that fixes bugs and just makes things even better. So hooray for the Resolve team. Also, I want to give a shout out to Flanders Scientific. They do not support this series, but they make really good monitors, and they're giving breaks to individual colorists who are finding themselves working at home and needing a color critical display at home. If you're in a financial bind, give them a call. They will cut you a break. And they make displays that are used throughout the industry, from onset to post. So give them a call. They're really good folks. I also want to give a shout out to Gaia Mount and the producer I worked with, Wang Sunjun, on the film Carry My Heart to the Yellow River, which is going to have two online screenings, two one-time online screenings. Lastly, here's my website, vanhurkman.com. If you're interested in other things I've written and what I do, that's where all my information is. You probably already know this if you've been coming back time over time, but if you've registered, you only need to register on Zoom once, and the same credentials will work over and over and over. If you want to ask another question, you get the opportunity to submit one question on Zoom, but you can come back to my webpage and go down here, and there's a form where you can ask more questions. I am running a little bit behind on my questions, but I'm committed to answering most of them. So please submit a question if you have it, and eventually we'll get around to taking a look at it and giving you some answers. Actually, first off, I want to make a correction. So last week, I believe I said the January 2020 manual was the most recent version of the manual. I was wrong. You'd think I'd know this. I helped write the dang thing. The March 2020 manual is the current version of the DaVinci Resolve reference manual. That's important because the March 2020 version has all the new features that was introduced in version 16.2, a lot of which were features in the Fairlight page. That was a big Fairlight release, although there was a sprinkling of all kinds of other features. So just be aware, I'm sorry for spreading misinformation. I should know better. The March 2020 version of the manual is the correct version of the manual. So that said, I'm curious if Manuel López Pérez is out there. Manuel, if you're there, raise your hand. I'm not seeing you in the list. But you ask a question that, frankly, someone else has asked me in the week, and that someone else is Marc Wielage, who is actually, I'm turning him on. Marc, are you there? Hello, Marc.
See, unmute.
There you go.
There I am.
There
Yes,
you
I'm
go.
here.
Yes. Hello, Marc.
Yes.
So Marc Wielage has graciously agreed to join me in the last half hour of today's program, and we're going to talk about node structure and we're going to talk about film grading with Marc, who's a colorist of great experience. I'll let him introduce himself later on. But Marc, the reason I'm bringing you on board is when someone isn't around to talk to about a question, I usually drag someone else in who I know has a vested interest in that question. And this question is, aren't you concerned, Alexis, about Resolve's current drift? I mean, while you have more and more tools, they seem to be less and less polished, and you get the feeling that there's not much willingness to fix new mistakes, and old ones perpetuated version after version. And that's very similar to the question that you asked me, Marc, which is basically, do I think we're getting too derailed, including all kinds of other things in DaVinci Resolve?
Yeah, my joke is we could use more color features, but instead what we have is boring shot detector instead. And
Yes.
It does get some of us frustrated when we are making our living through color. But I also understand that Black Magic is trying to be all things to all people. And I get that, there maybe there is room for everybody. I just worry that sometimes features are added and they maybe take away from the efforts that could be applied to, say, color and OFX color features and things to streamline that whole process. On the other hand, I have to say the brand new 16.2.1 is a fantastic release. I've been using it for the last few days. Flawless, zero
Yes.
crashes, no slowdowns, pretty much perfect in every way. Minor little things, some things that have been kind of lagging for several versions, but nothing that I think most people will notice or care about.
Mm-hmm. So, uh, I mean, of course, I'm asked this question because I work with the team as a consultant. And of course, I'm not going to talk about new features and I'm not going to talk about road plans or anything like that. But what I will say is that as everyone should be able to see in this latest release, 16.2.1, there has been a real focus, and I would say this has been in the last 4 months, just solid, on
Mm.
squashing bugs and, getting rid of those niggling little things that creep in whenever you do big new releases with lots of new features. There's always some little bits that creep in, and they've really been stomping those out. I think I can freely say on a weekly basis, it is a preoccupation of the entire engineering team to make Resolve run better, run faster, and run more reliably. So that's the first thing I'll say is I don't want anyone out there to think that the team isn't thinking about stability in a big way. I think this release proves that. In terms of am I worried about their drift and the additional tools? I mean, I have a unique perspective because in addition to doing color work for clients, I am a filmmaker. And if you go back to the Final Cut Classic days, and I had the good fortune of working with that team as well, there was a real desire once upon a time to create a single app that was able to encompass more of our post-production workflow to try and minimize the back and forth. And then Apple got involved with buying a bunch more apps and creating a suite, and that concept kind of fell by the wayside in favor of creating a suite of pro apps, right? That's what they called the group, pro apps. But one of the things that excites me about what's happening at DaVinci right now is the fact that we are finding interesting ways of getting rid of unnecessary conforms. If you're editing in the same application and the editing is a very high level of editing, as you're color grading in, and the color grading is at a very high level, then right there, if you're bouncing between grading and touching up your edit and grading and touching up your edit, anyone who's done round-trip workflows in any application with any other NLE can immediately see the benefit of that. The trick being, the editor has to be good enough for editors, professional editors, to want to use it. And so in terms of bringing in professional editing and having color correction work alongside that, I think the better a job we can do as an editor, the more colorists will be able to benefit from that workflow. And I've got 2 clients of my own that are cutting in Resolve now, and I love it. They send me a project file. There's no conform. I just relink and done. It's amazing. And the effects are no problem. And then speaking to effects, incorporating Fusion, while that road was maybe rockier than we would have preferred, has really been a huge benefit for finishing artists. You know, anyone who wished Resolve had a little bit of paint, well, now you have it in Fusion. If you wished Resolve had a planar tracker for match moving, well, now you've got a whole environment for doing very, very professional match moving with a tool set that's, what, 20 years mature and very deep. So I can say in version 16, the Fusion page has gotten more reliable. I'm using it, like, when it first came out, I was with everybody else. It was a little bit crashy. I think we can admit that. But that has really polished up. The performance has gotten better. It doesn't crash anymore. It's become a very reliable part of my workflow. And I know a handful of finishing artists, specifically finishing artists, who are really enjoying having that tool set. So I think that's ultimately a win as well. Are we, you know, is this walking around the block to get to a more advanced post-production solution? Maybe, but you know, development's hard. So I cut the team a lot of slack, and I think the vision is sound for having a tool that enables multiple artists from multiple post-production disciplines to work together very directly. And we haven't even talked about collaborative workflow, which for certain situations is incredibly powerful. And again, it's direct because it's all inside the same app. So that's my response. And the other thing I'll say is to his question specifically, do I feel like there are a lot of tools that aren't getting polished? I would actually disagree vehemently, because there isn't a version of Resolve that gets released where motion tracking for Windows isn't tweaked for a little more improvement. There isn't a version that goes by where, for example, the color stabilizer tool that I showed either last week or the week before, when that first came out, it had results that in my view weren't necessarily ideal, but they kept working at it, and the current iteration is fantastic. So there is a very real effort to improve things, absolutely. And it's fairly relentless, but it's also, it tends to be invisible because a lot of those things fall into the bucket of, as the README says, you know, various performance improvements, which, you know, is kind of a catch-all for just about everything. So that's my reply. I get why people would feel that way, but I don't think it's really as true as people think. And also, I will say that in my view, we haven't had NAB this year, so there hasn't been a release yet. But in past NABs, when typically there have been releases, even with releases where there's a ton of new tools going into some of the other pages, there's always something for colorists. always. You know, it may be 5 features as opposed to 50. But the other thing is, a lot of times colorists get new features by virtue of new resolve effects that get put into the app. You know, there are a lot of features that are of benefit to colorists that are of benefit in an oblique way. It's not necessarily here's a big splashy thing on the color page. So yeah, I mean, I would gently disagree with that assertion. And if anyone's worried that the team at DaVinci and Blackmagic overall is not as concerned about color as they used to be, I can safely say that's not at all true. So
The conversation that comes up online is there are users who are afraid that Resolve, in trying to be all things to all people, is turning into something like Hit Film or Sony Vegas, where there's a lot of very flashy bells and whistles, kind of for wedding videographers. And whenever I'm presented with that argument, I do try to defend Blackmagic, and I'll say, look, if you don't want to use the flashy features, if you don't want to use the cut page or fusion or whatever, at least you can turn those buttons off in the interface. So if you just want to go bang from the media page to the edit page to the color page, just as you always have, going back to, I don't know, version 6 or 7, it's not that hard to do. So you can just kind of pretend they're not there. The danger in that is we know that there's another million lines of code in the background of the program, which is probably not making it as stable as it could be.
Well,
so,
I wouldn't second guess the engineering team. Again, I can't speak out of turn, but I will tell you that from what I know, the engineering team's been really good at not letting a lot of cruft sneak into the app. So anyone who's worried about millions of lines of code, I don't think you need to worry about that.
Yeah. Well, what I have to say is the program feels a little peppier. I think it's loading on my system a little slower. But once I've got a session up and running and I'm switching back and forth between timelines and I'm bouncing from the head of a timeline to the end of a timeline and so on, it's fairly fast and responsive. And I noticed an immediate difference with 16.2.1, as I said. And that tells me somebody's paying attention, somebody's noticing, somebody has made this fix, and it got swept under the rug of miscellaneous improvement and stability things. And I know whenever I see that, I go, oh, that probably represented somebody working for 200 hours of sleepless nights to get that done, and it's just a couple of sentences.
It's a line item. It's a line item.
But it's a line item. But boy, it makes a difference. Still, I can't help but be a little jealous when I look over the shoulders of my friends who are using Baselight or Nucoda or some of the other competing color systems, and I think, wow, I wish I could do that, or I wish I had that particular feature. And maybe that's one of those the other man's grass is greener things where you're just kind of jealous of what you don't have. Maybe that's it. I have an advantage over other people in that I have used a lot of these other systems before. And so I'm keenly aware of how they are different and how they are better. Resolve makes the most sense for me. It makes the most sense financially and logistically. And I think it exactly fits our needs. And most importantly, it allows me to work very quickly. I think you know Gray Marshall,
yes.
Wonderful colorist here in LA. And Gray is big on luster. He's used luster for a lot of his projects over the years. But luster is one of those things where it's like you're painting the Mona Lisa with a toothpick. and you can do it. You can do it a pixel at a time. And maybe with Resolve, it's more like doing it with a roller.
Right.
So you're making very broad strokes, and maybe Baselight is somewhere in between where you have a brush that can be as fine or as wide as you want.
Hmm.
And you know, I have to say, sometimes, especially for television or projects of a limited schedule, Resolve is ideal just for speed. I
Well,
would I would jump on Resolve anytime I had to meet a quick turnaround deadline with great results.
oh
And I
yeah.
I have had to educate DPs before. There are cinematographers who are color snobs
Hmm.
who will say, "Oh, what are you using?" And I go, "Well, this is Resolve. It's the latest and greatest." And he goes, "Oh, I wish we were on Luster. You know, you can do these complicated keys, and you can do these windows." And I go, "You mean like this?"
Right.
And he looks at it and goes, "Oh, so you can do that too?" And I go, "Oh yeah." Well,
The last thing I'll say,
sure. I'm sorry.
and oh no, no, not at all, not at all. Never be sorry, Mark. This is all about
Yes,
having a conversation. But
sure.
the last thing I will say is that there's a, anyone who wants to run down Resolve because, oh well, that's the thing you can download for free, right?
Right.
And believe me, I've heard every shade of complaint that you have to give it away. It makes me seem like the freebie colorist. And I think, I mean, I'm not going to speak to the strategy. Honestly, I think ultimately it's kind of been good because it has revived the pool of Resolve colorists in a huge way, and it's made it really accessible to people in education. And I'm never going to say no to that. But I will say to people who have questioned that over the years that the current version of Resolve, and Mark, you use the 2K, right?
Oh yeah.
I
Oh,
mean,
and also 888 and DaVinci Classic, and
how for
I
three
mean,
hundred dollars,
back to the stone knives and
right?
bearskins days.
For $300, you have better color processing, more features, more sophisticated features, and more useful workflow than you had, what, 10 years ago
Yeah,
for 250, $300,000.
I think there's some truth to that. Although whenever I have a an economic discussion like that with my client or my clients, and they'll say, "Gee, and this is only 299." And I kind of wave my hands around the room and I go, "Yes, it's 299 for the software, but then it's $50,000 for the everything else that makes it work for us."
Yes.
And
Yes. The
not every
display, the workstation, the control
That's right.
surface, all of
That's
the
right.
things that you need to
And
be
a
fast
and
and
a
accurate.
and a boatload of very fast drives. I mean, we've got, I don't know, $15,000 worth of drives in the room. So,
Right.
and then you have to back them up, and then we have multiple systems. My joke about Resolve is the way we work is we run three of them at once.
Hmm.
So
And then,
we have a conform system, a render station set up, and then the real Resolve system on which we do color.
right.
So we kind of use the three in tandem just so we have parallel processing the hard way.
And then, of course, what price tag do you attach to 10, 20, 30 years of experience as an
Well,
operator?
40,
That's
40 years. Thank you very
40
much.
years.
Let
40
me
years. I didn't
date
want
myself.
to I
In
didn't want to
fact,
I didn't
in
want to
fact,
put words in your mouth.
if I live to July, which is very iffy at this point, it will be 41 years as a colorist in Los Angeles, still
Wow.
working, still smiling, and still dancing. So yeah,
Nice.
yeah,
All right, Mark. Well, I'm gonna bring you back,
I
but
will be on hold.
thanks for chiming in. I didn't want to just talk about that question on my own because it would sound hopelessly self-serving. Um, anyway, but I'll bring you on back,
All right.
and thanks for chiming
Well,
in.
I will hide in the background.
Okay. So the next question, and this one is from Krishna Kumar. Krishna, you've been very patient for a couple of days. I'm going to turn on your microphone.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello, Krishna.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Where are you located?
I usually live in LA, but when this all went down, I high trekked it up to Denver for just while everything is kind of going over. So I'm in Denver at the moment.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Are you a Denver native?
No, I'm actually Kansas City native.
Oh, you just like Denver.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot to like about Denver.
I figured it was like high up, away from everything, you know.
High up, eh?
Yeah.
I just won't say anything more about that.
uh,
So you're hiding out. So are you a colorist by trade?
I'm just like a general. I started kind of doing video editing work when I was like 11,
Okay.
and just to like experiment with Adobe on my own. And then as I started getting older, I kind of wanted to do projects, but it was hard to find people, so I kind of took it upon myself to learn everything.
Okay.
So I'm kind of an all around. I like to learn every aspect of filmmaking. So I was recently kind of diving more into coloring on a specific project, and this one particular problem was really like frustrating me, and there isn't really an answer anywhere. And so when I saw you were doing these webinars, I was like, oh my god, this is perfect.
So the question I can't remember if you asked one question or two, and I cherry picked the top one. But the question you submitted was, once you have a mood, how do I pick the colors to create said mood and where?
Right.
Okay.
So like, just I guess a little explanation on that. So I was kind of experimenting with LUTs and that whole thing. I know there's like a big discussion on like if LUT should be used and all that stuff. And I ended up just tweaking everything in the end anyway after using a LUT. And so then I was like, well, I should learn how to do these on my own instead of relying on a LUT. But then I'm faced with basically 360 color choices. And I don't know like what to put where. So I was just wondering like what motivates what colors to pick and where to place them and why. Like, is it all color theory or is it just personal choice?
Well, so great. This tells me that I've chosen a good way to answer your question. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flip back to my project from 2 years ago, Carry My Heart to the Yellow River. Because that project has, on the one hand, it has a lot of looks by virtue of the locations we had and what the DP was doing.
Mm-hmm.
But I also graded it in a very specific way to bind all those things together.
Okay.
So, what I'm going to start with is the hospital scene, which is right here. And I don't know if this is necessarily the best way to start. Also, just so you know, this is a demo project, so it's kind of baked in a way that the original media wasn't necessarily. So if I go, why isn't this working? That's why. And what you're looking at is actually my HD grade. My HDR grade, I should say. Because this was an HDR project, that's how I was mastering it, and that was the original grade. So this shows you my thought process in terms of the node structure that I chose for this particular project. We're going to talk about node structures later on with Marc Wielage, but this is kind of your first introduction to how I think about the very question you're asking. Now, if I go to my timeline grade, you see, in terms of making this into good SDR, the rest of my story. Okay. And this is another example of a node structure that I built specifically for this project, specifically to turn the HDR version into SDR so that I could leverage all the decisions and the work I did in HDR in SDR. But you don't really care about any of this. This is a little more technical.
Okay.
This is the creative part. This is where I was thinking about the mood and the vibe.
Right.
And what I'm going to say is when I think about a grade, when I think about what to do with a scene, as a director, and I'm fortunate in that I get to grade my own project, so I don't have anyone to argue with but myself, possibly the DP. I get to really blue sky think through what I want. When I'm working with a client, of course, the first conversation I have is, what do you have in mind for the project? And are there any scenes you need me to know anything special about? You know, I usually try to engage the client in a conversation about what's the mood you're going for. Is this supposed to be a scary scene? Is this supposed to be a romantic scene? Is this supposed to be a tragedy in this scene? And that's really going to inform my approach. So aside from those overall goals, the three things I care about are, one, what the image will hold. Because every image lends itself to a different treatment just by virtue of the palette that it has, right? So lots of blues in here. If I go ahead and turn all these off, you can see that what I've got is
A lot of blue already.
a lot of blue already,
Yeah.
right? I'm not doing anything that isn't already there, but I am reinforcing things in a very particular way.
Right.
If I go to another scene and I turn my grade off, this is a scene of something. This is an example of something that's pre-baked.
Okay.
Can I get to the original? Yeah, okay. So here's the original. And here's what I did with it. Again, I'm not doing anything that isn't necessarily there or motivated by what's there.
Right.
Sunlight, if it's an overcast day, can be very bluish. This is not some weird matrix green treatment, right?
Right.
I'm simply controlling what's there in a way that suits my mood. If I go down the way, okay, here we are at a bus station. Same thing. If you look at the original, it actually is kind of a warm orangey day,
Right.
and I'm just doubling down on that as the bus is pulling up. When we get inside, you can see that the weather changed a little bit, and I've got all those crazy levels. But of course, it's raw, so I can pull a lot of that back, make it do what I want it to do. But again, I'm working with what's there, and that tends to be my approach. Is I want to work with the scene. I want to work with the art director's palette. That's thing number 2.
Okay.
Is the art director and the DP are both working together to put light and color into my frame.
Right.
So the only time I'm fighting that is the occasional project where a director or producer comes to me and says, I hate what was done. I hate it. And I need you to do something else. And then it's a lot of work. And it's kind of too bad. But ideally, when the creative team of the movie is in sync, then the art director is putting the colors into the frame. The DP is painting with light and shadow to create an atmosphere and to give the audience their image. And then I'm refining those things to ideally make it the best image it can be, and then adding some of my secret sauce in terms of emphasizing certain colors, yada, yada, yada.
Okay.
And then the number three sort of overall method thing is I try to work out a visual vocabulary for a movie. And what I mean by that is actually if I jump over to Safari, I wrote an article on my blog called Seeing Green. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about in that article is that there's no one meaning for a given color or tone, right?
Right.
So orangish light could mean romantic or energetic. It could also mean hot and uncomfortable if it's a desert movie and that's what the story is pushing. Same thing. A bluish light can be alienating and subdued, or it can be cool and refreshing. And what I wanted to get people thinking about is that as a colorist working within what the DP and the production designer have given you, You have the opportunity of defining what that vocabulary, what that emotional vocabulary is for your movie, right? If you're establishing that warm is discomfort, and then you're cutting to a scene where it's romantic, the hero was saved and, you know, is enjoying a cool beverage at a bar with whomever.
It's happy hour.
You know, maybe you don't want that scene to be really warm too. Maybe you want to go in a different direction for contrast. And so there's no rules there. But the thing I want people to think about is through your choices as a colorist, you are helping to cultivate the emotional vocabulary of color for your particular movie. Now, that may have been predefined by the production designer and the DP, or maybe if you're working on a lower budget project and no one was really thinking that way, maybe you can step into that role and help define that. And then the next part of your question is, so how? I understand what my goals are. How do I accomplish these things? And what's nice about these grades is that shows you how I'm doing it, right? So the way that I generally think for most node structures that I put together for projects is I have I call it a base grade. It's not the base grade of Baselight, but that's my primary grade. That's the foundation of the image. So let me go back to, actually, will this work if I, no, that won't. So I need to go back. So the reason this isn't happening is because, you know what, I don't need to go into that. That doesn't matter. So I'm going to go back here. And if I turn everything off but that base grade. Oh, come on. This was just working. Let me try this. There we go. Okay. So if I turn everything off but the base grade, you can see that that's just my starting point.
Right.
That's the first image that I found. And in DaVinci Resolve, little orange dots appear at every palette where you've done something. This is I think that was introduced in version 15, maybe.
Little orange dots.
You're looking at the screen. You see these little tiny orange dots?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Right. So here you can see that I've done something with primaries wheels and I've done something with curves. Those are the only two things I've done here. And that's, you know, my approach is generally to work in this way. So some colorists break these things up. That's purely an organizational thing. I like to just kind of wing all that out in my bottom grade. I have noise reduction happening before that. You know, that's just a utilitarian thing. So then the next thing I do is, and this means nothing in this grade, but for HDR, I have a specific node that I use to pop out those super bright values. Any light that I want to really ring, I use this node to control my highlights. Then I have an Hsl Curves node, typically. I love using curves. Anyone who's read anything I've written about grading knows that I love curves.
Yeah.
And you can see that that's where I really started finding my way with what I wanted to do with this image. And if I go and look at those curves, you can see that I'm moving the hues around a little bit. If I reset this and undo, you can see what I'm doing. I thought that original blue was a little harsh.
Right.
And so I kind of pushed it towards a cyanish receiving of the light color.
Okay.
In order to blunt that. And I also almost always use hue versus sat to really shape the saturation. So I mean, it's a lot of people fall into the trap of thinking that you need to change your color balance in order to address the saturation of different things and control your palette. When in fact, all you need to do is maybe boost the green a little bit, duck the red down a little bit, and now you're able to the overall color of the scene is fine. You're just looking to emphasize your palette or de-emphasize what shouldn't be part of this particular scene's palette.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm doing here. And then there's all kinds of other things you can do that I don't think I bothered with here. And I still don't necessarily consider this to be stylistic, although it kind of is. But it's an overall thing. Then I've got my stylize node. And I'm not sure if the stylize node is doing anything here, but this is typically if I'm doing like some kind of blue undertone or something unorthodox to kind of twist the image in a really creative way, I will have a stylize node where I stick that so I can turn it on and off later on to see if I really think it's a good idea. Sleep on it, figure out what I'm going to do. And this is my approach to controlling the palette of each scene. So let me go to one more shot that hopefully I can walk through. Let me see if this one is going to do what I want. Maybe this one. There we go. Oh, I know why this is. All right. It's just been so long since I've demoed with this. So again, here's the base image. My base grade, I'm just really focused on what's happening there.
Right. Yeah.
And then my HDR pop node in this case is actually hitting my midtone values. My Hsl curves are now, you can see, subduing some of the colors that I felt were too vibrant to really feel naturalistic given the scene. In stylize, you can see what I'm doing is I'm hitting the outside with some warmth. And I'm just doing that with a rebalancing, basically. In fact, I think I'm doing that with the log controls, just as a shortcut so I don't have to pull a key. The highlight, if you use the log controls on non-log material, you can restrict the highlight color balance so that you're not getting into your shadows.
Right.
And it's just it's an abuse of the tool, but it works.
Okay.
And then I've got a cool undertone that actually is it's basically putting just a little bit of bluishness into those lighter shadows. And then this last node is getting her face. I like her being in shadow, but I still want the face to emerge from underneath that hat. And so what I'm doing here is I know that she's in Ganan now. She's starting her bike ride. Unlike the blue kind of mournful and somber vibe of her friend in the hospital, here she's starting her adventure. Everything's unknown. She's walking into the darkness, kind of. And I can extemporize countless rationales for doing what I did.
Yeah.
But bottom line, I wanted this to be warmer, and I wanted it to be warmer in a controlled way that didn't overemphasize every warm color or vibrant color in the frame. And so that's my approach, scene by scene, just figuring out what do I want to do with the colors of this particular scene. Same thing. That's what we had to begin with.
What? Oh my gosh. So this one was way different than what
and funnily enough, it's raining cats and dogs outside. Raining. And this shot, we almost didn't get this shot because the sun's about to go down. The poor DP was hauling out every light fixture we had to make that match the other side.
Right.
But, given that, what I was matching was a rainy day. In fact, I decided to just have it be rainy. And so this is me working through, again, HSL curves. I'm doing very subtle work, but you can see what I'm doing to kind of create a more neutral skin tone here to make the background color seem that much more neutral and bleak. And then stylize isn't doing anything. I don't think cool undertones is doing anything in here that much, but throwing in a little bit of shadow. And then I was actually taking care of her acne there.
Oh, that's nice of you.
Well, you know, that's,
yeah.
I don't want any actress to feel like just because they got a pimple the morning of the shoot, the first day of the shoot, that they got to live with that for the rest of time. That's not fair. So this is my approach. It's really evaluating the scene, evaluating your emotional rationale for that scene, if it plays into the client's goals. And then basically what you're doing is you're just controlling the color palette in various insidious ways, either overall or selectively with curves.
Right. Okay.
So does that help?
It does. It definitely. I'm realizing how much more of a like collective, I guess, group effort the whole color scheme of a film or anything is, and it's not just all on the colorist or all on one person.
It shouldn't be, hopefully, ideally.
Right. So, yeah, that's super helpful. You mentioned skin tones really briefly. This may be a different question, which I can put it in the forum later. But I was going to ask about if you ever qualify skin, because I see online there's a lot of tutorials or whatever about people saying, do your look and then select the skin tones and put them in a layer node right on top and then have them come through. And whenever I do that, it always seems to like distract from it. So do you ever like select skin tones on their own? Because in these grades you've shown me, I didn't see anything like that.
No. So, I mean, that depends entirely on how good a job the DP did in crafting the image that the audience should see. And it also depends on how insanely stylized you're doing, right? Like if you're doing I'm talking about naturalistic grading for movies, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a bit. Because is Kristen Oyang out there by any chance? She's not, but I'm going to answer her question. In my work, I favor a naturalistic approach, or at least a plausibly naturalistic approach, because sometimes, you know, that hospital scene is really pretty stylized. It's just, you know, it doesn't necessarily, I'm hoping it doesn't slap you in the face with how stylized it is. But if you do a music video or you're doing a commercial or you're doing something where the point is to create a hot look, right? To do that sort of editorial magazine fashion thing, then yeah, you know, you may be doing a big grade on the background and you want to hold out the skin tones because that grade is not going to be flattering for the talent. It depends on what you're trying to do. I will say that if I'm making small adjustments, I really try to get away with using hue versus hue. And you'll see that in a lot of grades I do where I hit the face. And let me see if I can. Yeah. You can see that this is actually shaping light that's falling on her face. If I can do it that way and be done, that's exactly what I'm going to do. A, that's a knob on my control surface.
Oh, nice.
B, it's fast. And C, it's smooth. It has a nice roll off into the rest of the image. So I don't have to sit there for 20 seconds working a key. But if this ends up contaminating too much of the background, that's when, yeah, I'll absolutely jump to a key. I will say there are 2 prior episodes I've done where I talk about both of these things. So hit the prior episodes on the YouTube channel. Yeah. And I actually do full demos. So
I
give
did
that
see
a
the one
look.
where you did the 3D key. I was sitting here and I was like, oh my God, I've never seen that tool before.
It's
So,
hiding. It's hiding behind all
yeah,
those dots.
yeah.
Read the manual, people. There's a lot of good stuff in there.
Well, thank you so much. That was so helpful. And thank you for doing this webinar series. It's really nice to get.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And feel free to submit another question.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
All right. Talk to you later.
You too. Bye.
Okay, so the next question I've got, and I'm trying to pay attention to the time, and I'll actually talk to Valentine Andreev. Is Valentine Andreev out there? There you are. I hope you have a microphone, because I'm turning you on. Valentine, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Is online?
Yes, you're online. Hello.
Hello.
So you asked me a question about, I saw I'm not a big fan of log grading. Is there any particular reason for that? And I hope you just saw that's not necessarily true.
Well, not only you, but it's almost always online tutorials that use only primary toolset.
Oh, okay. So it's not just me. You just see a lot of lift gamma gain tutorials out there, and you're wondering why there aren't so many log grading
First of all,
tutorials.
I'm a long-time Resolve user, and when I think it was version 12 when they fixed old log toolset, since then I almost always use only log tools, not primaries.
Right.
At least it's faster for me, better in any ways.
Well, you know, that's the reason the log tools were added to Resolve, is it wasn't for the people who've been doing lift gamma gain for years and years and years, and are probably still doing that because it's what we were used to. It was to welcome other users who wish they had the kind of log tool sets that they were used to in other environments. So what I always tell people is there's no wrong approach to grading. I know many colorists who use the log tools. You know, they'll set exposure and they'll do offset, and many of them use printer points, and we have a printer points interface that works in a variety of different ways. And they'll use the contrast and pivot tools, and that's what gets them to where they want to be. And I also understand that that method of grading lets you create very linear color balance shifts that in many ways can be more cinematic and can solve problems in a very different way. And in fact, I do that. I will use offset. Absolutely. I've used it on many projects. But I tend to prefer, personally, and again, it's just habit, right? Habit once formed, hard to break. I prefer setting my black point and my white point with two different controls, rather than parking exposure and then using contrast and pivot. I feel like that's just quick for me to do. And the other thing I do is I use exposure curves for everything. I'm always hitting the curve to create some kind of an L or an inverse L or whatever I'm trying to do. I like to shape my midtones with curves. And so instead of, basically with the 3 seconds of my 10 seconds I want to put to doing a quick thing, I would rather put those 3 seconds into using the curve than using contrast and pivot. And again, this is not me saying people who use contrast and pivot are wrong. That's fine. If that does what you do, then do that. This is just the way that I work. And as I show people my approach, that tends to be what I teach. I will say that I believe, in terms of people teaching the subject out there in the world, a lot of people who teach tend to come from the video world a little bit more, where lift gamma gain would have been your first exposure to these tools. People who are using log tool sets more aggressively are probably coming from the film world more and coming from other tools more, and they're probably too busy working to do a lot of teaching.
Well, I
So-
was the author of first Resolve course for Russian-speaking community. I think it was for version 9 or even 8.
Okay, cool. Well, you should keep going.
Ah,
Teach people to use those log tools.
of course I teach. And
That's excellent.
maybe if you have connection with Resolve team, can you ask them, and no, not in next release, but to fix qualifiers when in log space they work not so.
I understand exactly what you're saying.
It will make lots of things much
Yes,
easier.
yes, I get it. What those of you who don't understand, if you're trying to pull a key on a log signal, and you're grading in log so that the signal's just compressed, it makes it hard to pull clean specific keys. I think I wouldn't be talking out of turn were I to tell you that the Resolve team is abundantly aware of this issue. So, you know, hopefully someday a solution will present itself.
Let's hope this day will be close to us.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. I get it. I get it.
Okay.
So, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. So I'm now going to speak to Kristen Oyang, and I'm hoping, did she pop on? No, she did not. So Kristen Oyang asked me a question. She's a college student, and she asks, how can I improve my beauty appreciation as a college student? And I actually love this question, and since I was just talking about creative grading, I thought this would be a nice time to just quickly address that. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to switch back to my desktop, but I have cobbled together some stills from some movies. And so I just want to, you know, quickly talk about how, for me, the way I developed as an artist in terms of cinema is by watching a lot of movies. And I pulled together some of the movies that were really kind of formative for me in terms of thinking about visuals. And that's not one of them. Darn you, Resolve manual. So I wanted to start by talking about Horseman on the Roof. And the DP for that is Thierry Arbogast. And Thierry also was the DP on a couple other movies that I really loved. One is Ridicule, another French film. And the other is The Fifth Element. So any of you who are Fifth Element fans, the DP is the same DP that did The Horseman on the Roof, which is just a beautiful film. It's beautiful narratively and it's beautiful visually. And I just scraped a few images off of the web to show what I'm talking about. The DP just paints with such beautiful, soft light and creates such vivid images. And this was in the days of color timing, with maybe a little bit more help in the video releases, but still, these images were composed in the camera. These images were done on location. And so many of the films that I saw that made an impact on me when I was in film school and just after, when I was trying to find my way in the industry, were these kind of naturalistic, just beautifully lit movies, many of which were coming out of France at the time. And this had everything. This had a beautiful story. that was absolutely reinforced by the visuals. And I didn't really think about this movie's impact on my love of naturalistic grading until I saw it again recently. And I'm like, this kind of really sums up everything I want to have in a movie for me. So, you know, that's one movie that really made me think about visuals. Another movie that made me think about visuals in a very different way, and this is a hard one to get, and trigger warning, this has probably a million triggers in it, but it is a fantastic film. The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover. It's a Peter Greenaway film. The DP is Sasha Virney, and Sasha Virney also was the DP for most of Peter Greenaway's, and not all Peter Greenaway's films at this time. Again, this film made me think about the visuals. You can't not think about the visuals in a Peter Greenaway film because he's a painter, and his approach to the image in front of the camera is so painterly. It is so deliberate. And the takeaway from this film for me is just the use of color, the use of brilliant color, and the control of color. And here's something that I'm going to spoil the movie for you in one respect. I didn't notice this the first time I saw the movie, but the main character, the wife of the thief, he's the lover, that's the cook. But Jean-Paul Gaultier did the costuming, and that's the other thing about this movie is this movie hammers home what production design can do for you. Production design, wardrobe, these are as essential to color as anything because those are the colors you have to work with. And the more thought that gets put into these things, it can be amazing. So the wife has a wardrobe that as she moves through different environments in the movie, what Jean-Paul Gaultier did was he did multiple versions of each item of wardrobe so that as she moved to different environments with different color tones or just different colors, the wardrobe color changed with it. And again, if you just watch it and nobody tells you about this, you can miss it because it just somehow strangely seems natural and the events of the movie are so intense. But then when you go back for your second viewing and you notice this, you're like, oh my God, I didn't know you could do that. And oh, right, we can control the physical colors that we're seeing on set. So this movie really made me think about the deliberate use of visuals, the deliberate use of color, and mixed color temperatures. You know, when you have mixed color temperatures in a documentary, sometimes if it wasn't thought through, it can be distracting and odd. But using mixed color temperatures in a creative context can just be unimaginably gorgeous. So that's another thing, and that's another aspect of learning to appreciate art to the point where you can incorporate it into your own work, is learning how to see. And in that regard, that brings me to the next movie that I want to talk about, which is Black Narcissus, which is a Pressburger and Powell movie. They were working in the 30s and 40s. And Black Narcissus is just a gorgeous movie, and it'll stay with you. The DP for Black Narcissus, looking at my notes, is Jack Cardiff, who is a legendary British DP. This is the Criterion release cover. And the thing that I walked away with when I watched Black Narcissus, and this film is a little special for me because I was already working as a colorist when I saw this movie for the first time. This was early in my grading career. And the thing that blew me away in this movie was the reds. The reds in this movie are astonishing. And it's not because they're too saturated, it's because they're deep and they're rich in a way that filmic Technicolor red could be. This was a Technicolor film. And on top of that, the use of painted backdrops, and again, the control of the palette through production design and through just brilliant lighting. Really, it stands out. This is a film that feels rich. And after I saw this movie, the first thing I told myself is I want to learn how to grade so that I can create reds like this. And it's not easy necessarily, but that's the thing I'd really like people early in their careers to take away is the better you learn to do what's referred to in imaging science as image segmentation, the better you learn to do image segmentation in terms of breaking an image down into what are the pools of light, what are the pools of shadow, what are the pools of different hues, what are the pools of skin tones versus not skin tones, where are my memory colors, where are the colors where I have an expectation for what they should be, and then what are they really. The more you learn to separate the contrast of an image from the range of hues in that image, from the range of use of color in the image, the more you start to see those things independently as separate qualities, the more you'll be able to watch movies and really break down what is it that distinguishes this particular look. You know, yeah, sure, there's film grain, whatever. What I'm talking about is what are the shadow ratios? You know, what's the blackest black? What's the biggest highlight? How many highlights are there? You know, what's the treatment of skin tone and what variety of hues are there? You know, is the border between the lightest part of the image and the darkest part of the image a sharp border or soft? Is the image very pin sharp or does it have a softness to it? These are the things that the more you can separate them from one another, the more you'll be able to incorporate what you see into your own work. And so that's my pitch on movie appreciation. And I'm a big fan of films from the days of color timing because you couldn't get too crazy, right? You had to light. You had to put it in front of the camera. And on that note, I am going to switch over, because it's 5:10, to my guest for today, Marc. Where are you, Marc?
I am in fact here.
So everyone, this is Marc Wielage, and Marc, I'm just going to let you do a little quick 15-second introduction for who you are, what kind of work do you do?
Can't do it. All of my introductions run at least 45 minutes. The thumbnail is that I'm a longtime LA colorist who's been around since dirt. Since the days of all analog. I saw things go from completely film and analog videotape, and so on. It gradually started going into kind of a hybrid of some digital and some analog. And then it became completely digital by the end of the 90s. And then around 1999, we went to high def, and then gradually 2K and 4K. And here we are today in 2020.
Yeah.
And everything is the same, but everything is also very different.
Oh, man.
My joke is I still do the exact same job that I did 40 years ago, but it's just different tools and I turn different knobs, but it is the exact same thing.
Now, I just got to ask you, since it came up, do you use the log palette regularly?
I do, but generally only for fine tuning.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will use it if I have an absolutely perfect picture, but then I look at it and I go, gosh, I think I could get a little more crispness from the blacks if I just dropped it a unit or so. So I'll grab the shadow control only and just give that the tiniest tweak so that nothing else is adjusted except that lower 10%
Okay, so
or less.
so you're using
of the
its greater
signal.
specificity then.
That's correct. And I also I had a scene last night. I struggled all night with a fire scene, and I'm a big one for hating to see lost detail in something being clipped when it doesn't need to be clipped. And so we had a fireplace scene that gets out of hand, and people start catching on fire, and walls are on fire, and things like that. And this was an older film, but I had a recent DVD for comparison to which I was matching it. And on the old DVD, they just let everything blow out. With me, by using the log tools and a little bit of soft clipping and some carefully pinpointed, targeted corrections, I was able to get a full range of, I would say, 5 or 6 shades of yellow and red in the flames instead of a harsh white clipping that was in the original. And it looked a lot more natural, a lot more beautiful, a lot more engaging.
Okay, so you were using the highlight control of the log controls as kind of a wider, more customizable roll-off, basically.
Yeah, but I'm big on using the high range and low range and all that other stuff to just really target what I want. So I'm using a more of a scalpel with that kind of thing.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I dig it. So I'm going to promote you to be a panelist, which I probably should have done. So this will hiccup, but come on back to me, Mark. And
rejoining. Yes.
All right. So I decided that I'm so adverse to just having this series be me going on and on and on about my opinions. I wanted to bring other voices in, and one of the things I wanted to talk about with different colorists is node structures, because I understand there, as the general post population has become aware of certain colorists that use dedicated fixed node structures for doing their work. Of course, the question arises, well, what's the best one, right? What's the best way to do this? Is this the best way to do this? Blah, 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 blah. I will take this opportunity to say that I do not believe there is any one way to get there. And everyone's, as we talked about yesterday, my twin opposing opinions are: one, there's no wrong way to do it, but two, there are in fact a few wrong ways to do it. Or at least slow ways, or ways that aren't as graceful with the data. But every colorist I know has distinctly different things that they do. And I know it's always tempting for people to go, oh, I don't really necessarily want to talk about this, partially because you're worried that people will realize your way is a terrible way, right? You'll give away that you're a fraud, and that, you know, all these years, all these things you've done them poorly. And it's never true. It's never true. And you are one of the most experienced colorists I know. And so what I was interested in is seeing a little bit behind the curtain, as much as you will allow us to, of your approach to using a fixed node structure in your work, and how that works for you, what the advantages are, and even maybe what the disadvantages are when you decide to change approaches. So I'm going to turn it over to you. You can go ahead and share your screen, and I will just pepper you with questions.
How would I share my screen?
Yes.
How would I do that? Look at that. There it is. Da 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 da. Share screen. Okay, and we're going to go to Resolve, and we hit share.
Yes.
Okay, you should see
Success.
something.
I do.
I'm very excited.
I do. If I see it, everyone's seeing it. Raise your hand if you're seeing the screen, people. Yes.
All right. So fixed node structures. This was something that only became possible really with the advent of Resolve and other node-based color correction system. Prior to this, we had layer-based node or layer-based color correction systems, which is basically one thing in front of the other in front of the other. And I know the distinction may be small, but the advantage of doing it the way Resolve does it is you can kind of see at a glance where the hell you are. So looking at this, let's see if I can actually bop around in this thing. Yes, I can. Looking at this, I have started with just 2 nodes, and you can kind of call them anything you want. You could have a LUT over here in what I've called pre-1. What I generally do is I'll use the color science of the specific camera I'm using, or if it's a film scan, which I often do these days, I will use printer lights. And printer lights is just a fancy term for the, aren't they in here somewhere? There we go, offset,
Yep.
Here it is. So the
You
offset.
can see them more clearly if you look at primaries bars.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, let's look at primaries bars. I'm used to using a control surface. So excuse me. Does this actually zoom in?
No. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And by the way,
we won't worry about it.
I want everybody to know that every really pro colorist I know has no idea how to use the GUI because they're so busy. They do the control surface, and they are 20 times faster with that control surface than I am with mine because they're doing it every single day. They're playing that instrument. They're beating those drums.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
you put them in front of the GUI, and it's like, where is everything? That's
where the hell is it?
So I don't want.
Yeah, I'm used to hitting this button.
I don't
over
want
here.
anyone to think that that's any indemnification of your skill set. There's no reason to use the GUI if you don't have to.
So in these first 2 nodes, what I generally do is I would make some kind of offset control. I would use the monitor and the scopes as a guide. I'd use that just to sort of balance things a little bit. And
by the way, you can turn on the
compensate
scopes
for
if
black
you
level
want.
issues. Yeah, I could. And I guess
use the pop-up. There you go.
Oh, see. Normally I use Scope
right,
Box.
Right. Yeah, I know.
Which is a lot better. But I'm a big fan of Scope Box 4. Shout out to Mike Woodworth, who is a very nice guy, and I paid retail for that damn thing. So
Mike Woodworth is a great guy, and I love Scope Box.
Yeah.
I even had one of my designs for new vector scope targets appear in Scope Box. Mike and I worked on that. The Hue Vectors was an idea that I had that Mike helped me realize. But the other thing I want to say, since version 16, the Resolve scopes have gotten a lot better. So no bad mouthing the Resolve scopes, Mark.
No, they've definitely come a long way, and I get that their intended market may not be in the mood to spend another, I guess it would be like $1,500-$1,600 for Scope Box when you include the software, a little computer to run it, and a monitor, and the cables, and a capture card. So there is an investment you have to make. I come from a world where scopes used to be a minimum of $20,000. So to me, if I only spend $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 on scopes, I'm in heaven. That's the biggest bargain of the 21st century. So I'm very excited.
And you're also able to park those scopes directly on the output.
Yeah,
so
that's true too. And I another interesting thing about Scope Box, not to turn into a commercial for them, is you can have duplicates of scopes.
Yes.
So you can have one scope that's way zoomed in and another scope that's normal, and kind of glance back and forth depending on how you want to appreciate all ends of the signal at the very top and the very bottom and so on. And I can truthfully say, the 3 things that make me as fast as I am in color correction: number 1, fixed node trees, which we're talking about today. Second one is tools like Scope Box, so that I can get a better idea of what the signal is doing in terms of matching. And the third thing is having a great control surface. You can get used to anything, but I am fastest and most used to the big, giant battleship DaVinci Resolve advanced panels. And the advantage for me is I can go for 2 or 3 hours and not look down. Maybe I'll glance off to the GUI window once in a while, but I'm never looking at my fingers going, oh, where is that button? How do I bring up the offset? How do I bring up printer lights? Where is saturation? I'm never doing that because my fingers have memorized the panels. And that happens over time. You can do it with the mini panel, you can do it with the tangent panels, you can do it with a lot of the different services out there. Warren Eagles has a good line that he uses, which is you have to train yourself. You have to hit your knuckles with a ruler every time you reach for the keyboard or the mouse when that same command exists on your control parent, the surface. And if you can keep doing that repetition, you will get faster with the control surface over time. It just takes effort. So back to node structures, and pardon me for rushing through. So in my first preliminary node, I've just done a little bit of an offset. In the second node, I might do a gamma curve. I might, that is to say, a custom curve. And who knows how I would do that with the films that I get these days. I tend to put kind of a nice S curve in there, and it kind of depends on what I'm doing.
So you like the splines? You like the spline handles?
I do like the spline handles because I can make a really gentle S curve without getting anything too screwed up.
So I just want to pause you here. Raise your hand if you had no idea you could turn on spline handles in Resolve.
Yeah.
Because I'll bet that blew one or two minds.
Yeah, I've had a couple of people look at my node trees and they go, "Oh my God, that's the most perfect S curve I've ever seen." And I go, well, "Yeah, it's because I cheated and I did it with the
Do me
splines,
a favor and show where that is again in the option menu.
This is the little option drop down here, editable splines, very handy. The default anchors is handy as well. A lot of it depends on how curve focused you are. Alexis is very much into curves. I would be on curves as well if I was in a surgical situation, like my joke that I always use is like a Clairol commercial, where you're chasing pixels around the screen and really trying to make everything absolutely
every
perfect.
strand of hair. Yeah,
and I'm trying to crank out 20 or 30 minutes of a feature a day, and it's just not always possible. I've gone on job interviews where they'll say, well, how fast are you? What can you do? We know you can do decent work, but how fast can you work? And I'll generally say, I think I probably average about 300 or 400 cuts a day. But if it's badly lit, it might be 50 cuts. If it's extraordinarily well lit, I might do 500 or 600. So it all depends on the DP and the nature of the project and all of that stuff. But the fixed node tree helps me work a little bit faster because I have all these things preset. These are the first two nodes I've created. The next one, let's see if I have this set up correctly. Yes, I do. I have some more here. Now I can't really see this. There we go. I can move you off to the side. So at the very top,
you can middle click and drag down to pan around.
Oh no, that I know.
Okay.
What I'm trying to do is move you around.
Oh, I see.
So yeah. I'm actually trying to move that. So there's a reason why this is set up the way it is right now. What we've done is we have those first two preliminary modes, and then the next 2 or 3 nodes, we have one I call balance, another that I call gain 1, and another that I call gain 2. These 5 nodes really carry all the heavy lifting for the entire project. And I know people who literally will do really big ticket, $100 million major studio releases or multi-million-dollar TV commercials with just a handful of nodes. Why do they do it that way? They do it that way because they've got to knock out that whole session in 2 or 3 hours and move on to the next guy.
Yeah.
So it's all about speed, efficiency, keeping the client happy, and glancing at your watch to see when the next session is going to start.
I'll admit that actually informs my approach. You saw how many nodes I tend to use in an average situation, and that's informed by my work doing lots of documentaries. And like you say, you're
I have to say it's possible in a documentary situation you might have to alter your approach. So this is more scripted TV dramas, feature films, and stuff like that. It might work with sitcoms to a degree, but the advantage of it, especially if you're on a show and you're doing essentially the same setup week after week after week, you can have things set up, save it in a power grade, and the client comes in and says, you remember that really cold scene we did in episode 3 where it was 10 below zero and everything was really, really blue? And you go, oh yeah, you can pull that up, grab that power grade, bring it in, bop it in. The node structure doesn't change, but now everything goes in that blue direction. If it's the same DP in a similar lighting setup, you're there. And now all you have to do is do minor trims, match every shot, and now you've finished a complete sequence, which is great.
Well, show me how you use the BAL gain 1 and gain 2 nodes.
So balance, generally I do use lift, gamma, and gain for that, because these 2 nodes are getting the picture in what I call a quasi Rec 709 space. So they are.
That's your normalization, so to speak.
Yeah, that's exactly. Some people call it normal 1, normal 2. I've seen people do it that way. I've also seen people use the pre-grade to do that, which is perfectly legitimate. You could do it in a pre-grade. What do you call that? Group grade. A pre.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah, you could do it there if you wanted. I kind of like to have it there where I can keep an eye on it in case something changes. One very important thing I want to communicate, if there's one important thing I want to say today, it's you have to be aware of the order of node operations, which is kind of an obscure page in Alexis's manual. It's buried deep in there. But in fact, my joke is I wish they would put that maybe on page 2 of the manual, because that's how important it is.
So I just want to say that you have no idea how many times I hear this about how many different pages. I like to joke that there's 3,000 page ones, because every one is important to someone else.
By the way, did you? I know you have your hands on the manual. Did you realize that it's over 3,500 pages now?
Did we hit 35? I thought we were just at 3.
Yeah, I wanna say 3530 or something like that. It's just this mammoth manual.
I can't keep track anymore. I can't remember.
I know. I've been on a campaign for Blackmagic to consider splitting it up into 5 different manuals, which would be like an installation and config manual. And then it would be a kind of...
I'm going to stop you right there, because I know what you're saying, and this is no big trade secret. I've thought about it, but at the end of the day, my rationale is, if there's 5 things, that means there's 4 things you're going to forget to download, and when you're on set somewhere and you're like, oh damn, I don't have the rest of the manual, you will hate me. And I don't want to be hated, so we're just keeping it simple for now. Never mind about the manual. Let's get back to the node tree.
On the other hand, I will just point out this is what Baselight does.
Sure.
And they just do 3 things. They just have the installation config manual. They have a manual for colorists, which is kind of a how-to guide. And then they have a thing they call the reference manual, which is, here is where every button, knob, and switch and readout is. But it doesn't really tell you how to use it. And I really like that approach. It's a different experience than Resolve. I just point out there are a number of philosophies out there.
Oh, yeah. Around. And the bottom line is that, I'll just be honest, we're a small team. And... given the amount of information that I and my team have to manage, we can do one thing.
Yeah, no, I get it. I understand.
Anyway,
time is precious, and I think it's almost time for me to inject myself with Clorox so that I'll be safe for today. So moving on. So the balance node. So again, pre-1 and pre-2, just the setup nodes, are what I use just to kind of get the image in sort of a Rec 709 zone so that it looks good in a display referred setting. And I should mention, everything I'm doing is just in normal DaVinci YRGB color space.
So you're not using color management?
I am not using color management for the types of projects that I do. We can and will use color managed workflows like ACES if the client demands it. I find it a little cumbersome because the controls don't respond in the same way, and it slows me down. You can get past it, and there are people who have managed to conquer it. I am not one of them yet. So it's not my choice, but I understand that there are good reasons for it, and I've also spoken to DPs on the team who love ACES for very good reasons. So I get that. Getting back to me, so I would use balance to kind of steer the image in a more or less normal direction, usually with the trackballs on my control surface.
Go ahead and give us a quick adjustment.
Oh gosh, I don't have a control
art.
surface.
No one's expecting art.
I don't have a control surface. So
I just want people to see something happen.
Yeah, it's going to be very clumsy. So so maybe in this case I really need a vector scope. But and by the way, if I can give another really good tip. There is a West Side LA colorist. I don't want to say who it is because I will probably guess the wrong guy, but he points out the gamma control is a road to hell. You have to be very careful tweaking the gamma knob.
Are you talking about gamma color balance or gamma?
Gamma, it's more gamma level.
Gamma level, okay.
And if you start stretching gamma up, you can introduce all kinds of noise and strangeness in the picture. So when I adjust gamma, which more precisely is midtone, I tend to go down with gamma more than I ever go
So you're
up.
using it to compress your shadows rather than to expand
I will
them.
use it to compress mids and shadows a little bit. And I will try to avoid expanding it back out. If I get into a shot where it looks like I need more mid-range, I will go back to these preliminary nodes to try to adjust it there prior to color correction, if that makes any sense. Game 1 and game 2, very simple. That's where we're going to try to put some pop in the picture and make the thing kind of jump out a little
Interesting.
bit. There is a getting back to the Resolve order of node operations, you have to be very careful. There is a belief among some colorists, and I think this is a very ignorant problem, that if you screw the image up early on in the signal chain, don't worry. Resolve is 32-bit float. You're going to have all kinds of range to get that signal back later on. Today is not the day for that demo, but suffice it to say, if I really screwed up the shot with this node that I'm on here, which is node number 3, or God forbid, node number 2, and then tried to fix it in node number 5, it's not quite the same. You get an unnatural, weird picture because you kind of crushed and hurt the picture.
I'm going to bring up, because Mark Todd Osborne and I talked about this. God, that might have been last episode. And I had a go-to demo for years showing exactly what you're talking about. You know, crushing the hell out of the shadows and then doing something in a whatever operation and then expanding those shadows out. And it used to be old reliable. You'd bring it out and you'd be like, oh yeah, that's not as exciting as it was because it doesn't really survive. But here's the thing. I know for a fact that the engineering team has been working really hard on that. And I don't know what they did, but I can't demo it. Like watch last week's episode, Mark. I tried to destroy the signal, and it came back too good. So it's
Well,
I'm not gonna
perhaps-
say you're wrong, because I believe
Yeah.
in being ginger with the signal, and don't run the signal through a grinder just because you can. There's no reason for that. But if you have to do something like that, or you're trying something edgy, we're in a better situation now than we've been in the past. So it's interesting.
Well, that's true. Maybe the color processing is cleaner now. I never blamed Resolve for this, because I had similar problems with, Amigo and Dubner and Arcus and
Oh yeah, you just think that's the way
DaVinci
image
888
processing is.
and 2K. Yeah, and I would also draw analogies to audio. You can stomp on audio with limiters and compressors and EQs, and once you've done that, and then you go down the signal path, now you can't really get that stuff back because you've stomped on it a little too hard. In other words, if you have a limiter, something that compresses the signal early on, and then you have an expander that tries to widen that back out, it's not the same as if you just had a piece of pure wire, so to speak, between them. So the reason why I break down these adjustments, balance, gain 1, gain 2, is that I'm not pushing the signal and making any weird adjustments that go too far. I'm making subtle adjustments on top of subtle adjustments. Now, of course, you can do all of these in one note if you really wanted to, but I find if you're not stressing out the signal as much, there are advantages to that approach, mainly because you can backtrack. And you can go, oh, I've gone off the cliff here. I've got to rethink this.
And you know where it's happened, too. You know what's happening in each one of these things. And something you said yesterday that I think bears repeating is that one of the advantages to being this structured and relying on the same structured job over job over job is you internalize that structure, and you don't even have to think about it. It's almost an instinct. Oh, I do this in gain 2, so I'll bet the thing's in gain 2. Or this is what I do in
there
gain
is
2,
that,
and I'm going to look there.
And I want to give credit where credit is due. There are things about Resolve and about the way I work that are very instinctive. And my joke is I color correct by gut about 75% of the time, and of course the client input. But Ian Verdovec of Light Iron made a casual comment the other day on one of the colorist forums, where he said the biggest mistake he sees neophytes make is they try to make saturation changes very early on in the chain. And I said, wow, I've always known that, but I've never heard it articulated so clearly. So I would avoid any kind of saturation changes in these early nodes. And the only place I do saturation is right here in gain 2, where now I've got a signal that's probably 85% of the way there. It's completely balanced. The levels are right. The mids are right. Everything is pretty much where I need it to be. And now I worry about saturation. And I'll either use normal saturation, or for very special situations, I might use color boost. I might use curves. There's a lot of different approaches you might do.
That makes good sense to me. I mean, again, I would never have articulated that myself, but when I think about, I mean, you saw where I do my saturation work. I have a separate node for all my curves, and it's always the second one.
And you know, there's and there are certainly positives to doing that way, but as I'll show you with the next group of nodes, there is another way that I do it. I've got an unused node here on the top row, which I just call OFX1. And you never know, maybe we're dropping some grain in, maybe we're putting a little starburst somewhere, maybe somebody needs a beauty filter, who knows? Who knows what that might be, but I just have a spare node there just in case the client asks for it, or I realize, oh my God, we're really gonna need this. Let's see if I can hit the right button here. Yes, I did. So here is a new group of nodes. These are all serial nodes. And this is what Alexis was just talking about, which is selective control of chroma or saturation. And so I've got a secondary here. And in this particular case, I've actually got hue versus hue and hue versus sat. And generally what I do with my first secondary is I worry about skin tones. So in a lot of the material I get, the skin tones are kind of leaning a little bit magenta. And I will try to kind of push them a little bit more towards a warmer yellow look if I can. There are always cases where you don't need it, and then I just bypass it and
now
it's
let
done.
me ask you, because I and many others have certainly observed that with red footage, traditionally there could be a bit of magenta in the skin tones, and it's just something you look for. Are there other sources that have that issue? Is this something that comes up in film scans?
I don't know. I don't know why, but I do see it often in film scans. And I don't know if it's a setup issue or if it's just the nature of film. What's very interesting is for a couple of years, I was blaming one particular film scanning machine. I would complain to the guy running it, hey, I think everything you're giving me is kind of shifted clockwise a bit magenta. And he goes, well, is it a problem for you? And I go, no, I'm fixing it. And he goes, well, then there's no problem. But it was one of those weird things where I thought, why is this happening? And what's going on? I thought it was me. Then I started getting film scans from other scanners, and I went, oh my God, it's not improving. It's the same. We're still seeing kind of magenta skin tones. And I thought, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm seeing the world as too magenta,
this a stock
or maybe
thing?
not.
Or
well, except the movies I get range all the way from the 1970s to the 80s to the 90s and occasionally the early 2000s. So, and it has kind of continued. The main thing I see with newer stocks, especially once Kodak went with what is called their vision stocks, the T-grain stocks in the mid 90s, suddenly the grain dropped to about half the size it used to be. And we had this very beautiful, filmic, nice, wonderful image. In other words, they kind of perfected film in the mid 90s, and we didn't have the gross, ugly, coarse grain.
I remember those movies well. They were so fine-grained and crisp.
And I can remember a few DPs complaining, and they said, gee, I'm used to that texture. I love that grain. And I said, the grain looked like a burlap bag. Well, what we need is like a silk, the texture of silk, where it's very fine, but it's still palpable and you can see it and it affects the image, but it doesn't hit you over the head with a crowbar, which is what the old grain used to be. And they would kind of laugh at me, and they would say, well, Mark, you're just thinking about it in terms of video. I'm thinking about it in terms of how it looks in the theater. And I go, well, that's true. It is a different experience to take a piece of film negative and print it and then project it on a projector in a film theater. On the other hand, that doesn't happen a lot too much these days in 2020. So worrying about digital and how film reproduces in digital is, I think, a much keener concern. And there are still TV shows and motion pictures being shot on film. Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a fine film, completely shot on film.
All of Christopher Nolan's stuff.
All of Christopher Nolan's stuff. The HBO series Westworld, completely shot on 35 millimeter film. A show that's going off the cliff in terms of quality. Walking Dead. Walking Dead, the original, is still shot on 16 millimeter. And God bless them, it has a look that is ephemeral, and people try to chase it for digital. And I don't think you can quite get it. There are still advantages of film. But having said that, from my perspective, I think digital is easier to deal with in post. And it's certainly faster and probably more economical. So for that reason, probably makes more sense to most people. Still, not to go off on a tangent about film versus digital, if you line up 20 or 30 of the top cinematographers in the world and say, cost no object, what would you rather shoot on? A Red camera, an Alexa, a Canon, a Sony Venice, or film? Without even thinking, they're going to say, oh my God, film. Please, let me shoot the film. And I think the reason why is because film kind of protects the DP when they screw up.
Well, film is a very, again, in the camera workflow, right?
Yeah.
You gain an understanding of what that film is going to give you. I mean, I didn't shoot a lot of film, but when I was first starting out, I shot 16, and I discovered what it was I liked about Fujifilm stocks and what it was I liked about certain Kodak stocks.
Fuji definitely had a certain look. I was actually against Fuji stock for a long time, and I would have polite but terse discussions with cinematographers who would want to cling to Fuji. But a wonderful sitcom cinematographer, Don Morgan, who is still around, he must have 7 or 8 Emmys on his shelf. Don finally convinced me on a couple of shows that Fuji was fine. And but it was also like the last few iterations of Fuji stock that came out in the mid to late 90s.
I love the greens you got with Fuji.
That's what everybody always talked about. The thing that bothered me about Fuji, though, was not so much the greens. It was that when you hit something black, instead of the sort of smooth roll off you had with Kodak or with digital, in Fuji it went right off a cliff. It hit a wall and went straight down. There was just no smooth ramp there. And that was a huge struggle for digital in color correction, because we wanted to try to preserve those details and not just let them get hit by a sledgehammer, which is what we were seeing. Getting back to my node tree, so I've got a secondary node that I use primarily to fix skin tones if necessary. I've got a secondary tone node. And what happens to me is sometimes I see a bit of overall yellow creeping into shots. I'm very sensitive to that. I want the skin tones nice and warm and natural and not too magenta. But if I start seeing some yellow in the walls or some weird yellow reflections or something like that, sometimes I will pull that in. Now you'll notice most of these nodes are turned off, or at least 4 of the nodes are turned off. That's the way I work. I keep the node off until the node is actually needed, so it stays out of my way. But you have to be very careful when turning nodes on and off that you don't turn on the entire node structure. Because if you do, weird unwanted things will happen, and I'll show you that in just a moment. The next node I have is I have a node for a key and another key if necessary. And I'll use those in problem situations. And it's hard to describe when I might need it. I'll give you an example. Let's say we have a husband and wife arguing at a gas station, and there's a sign way in the background. And it's a very bright blue electric sign that's attracting our eye and kind of interfering with the scene. We want to concentrate on the actors and not on the sign in the background. I could try to pinpoint that on a secondary, but for a lot of reasons, it might be faster and easier just to set up a soft key, grab that color, soften it so that it's not too obvious and weird, use a little denoising, maybe use a tracked shape if necessary to confine the change on the blue sign just to that blue sign, and then I make the change. And this is the kind of thing where I'll show the director, when he did not ask for it. And I'll say, oh, by the way, that sign was making me crazy, so I went ahead and knocked it down. And he'll say, oh my God, thank you so much. That's been driving me crazy for 6 months. I was afraid we were going to have to go into visual effects to fix that. You did exactly the right thing. Or sometimes they might say, oh, no. That actually is going to come back later on in the show, and we need to remind people of that giant blue gas station sign. So leave it as it was. I want it to be garish and over the top. And I go, oh, okay, well, you see, this is a question of color correction informing the story and vice versa. And so you've given me some knowledge I didn't have before. We're going to go back to the way it was, and I'll turn that node off. So those nodes are there. Again, a key 1, key 2, they're there if I need them. And then if I run into a director or a situation where I go, oh, darn, I've made the wrong choice, I've got to turn that off. Now I can turn that off immediately and bypass it and not have to worry about it. Continuing with our node structure, here is the next row of nodes. And this is where we go Windows City. I'm a big fan of power windows, and I use them a lot in my work. I try not to relight the scene because I feel like I'm overstepping my boundaries and I'm beginning to stomp on the cinematographer's work. But in this case, I have, let's see if I can go over here. We have a window on the left and we have a window on the right. So if we needed to color correct these two nice ladies, because maybe on set they were concentrating more on the actress in the middle, but perhaps this lady on the left has a line and we need to have her up a little bit so that
you need to bring her out of the shadows a little bit.
That's right. I often refer to this as separating the actor from the background. We are essentially giving them an artificial key light. I have those ready to go and prepared. On the film projects I do, I also run into situations where I need to flag off the background. I used to call that a third window. I've been calling it a flag for about the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years since working with a major ASC DP who would constantly say, hey, can you flag off the background? And I go, you know what, we're going to call this the flag.
I was going to say that's very on set of you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I said, and I often tell DPs, think of me as your digital gaffer. You know, I'm here to fix the problems you couldn't do on set. So in this case, I'm gonna do this very clumsily.
And my experience with DPs is it's never a surprise when someone says, you know, I wish that shadow was a little deeper than it was. That comes up all the time. And it's not a, you know, it's not a put something there that was not. It was just make what's there more.
What's surprising to me is I'll do little things like this, and the DP will see it and he'll say, "Oh, I want to go much more bold. If you're going to put a flag or a cutter in there, let's take it to an extreme." And I try to kind of noodle up to these things. Again, I'm trying to be very, very respectful of the DP. So it's the sort of correction where you only notice when I take it out, and you go, "Oh, that's kind of nice." We're kind of shifting our attention further up to their faces. Maybe that's a good way to do it. This really comes into play with car commercials and things like that, where we want to attract your eye to the body of the car and not so much to the beautiful background around.
Well, and one thing I want to point out to people too is when you do an operation like that, you can often get away with really ham-handed shapes as long as what you're doing is intensifying contrast and not just doing an overall darkening.
Yeah, that's true. And something I learned from Dan Moran of Mixing Light some years ago. Dan taught me something that I had not thought about. He was rotoscoping somebody in Resolve and was literally cutting the actor out of the background. And he used multiple shapes for it. So he used a shape for the head, a shape for the body, another shape for the arm, another shape for the other arm, and then a completely different shape for the fingers, and then tracked them all separately. And I thought, Jesus, here I am being a complete idiot. I'm trying to do it with one gigantic power window, which, you know, clearly doesn't work because it's moving in 9 directions at the same time. And this is the sort of thing where a visual effects artist would know that. They would go, well,
I was going to say that's a very visual effects approach to reducing your workload.
Yeah, and it's a very handy thing to know. So know up front that this is the kind of thing where special situations you would have to modify the node tree, and that's just the way
And
it
that's where
is.
a stack of
The,
parallel nodes really comes in handy.
yeah, and I do use parallel nodes with my real node tree. This is the counterfeit
Okay.
node tree we are using for demo purposes
Okay.
only. So, but I do have some parallel nodes, and I have the option of some layer nodes under some situations. The last one I have here is a very popular node in LA. When we first got vignettes with, I want to say it was DaVinci 888. It might have been Renaissance. I'm not sure, but when that happened, everybody went vignette crazy, and it was the sort of thing where, you know, for a lot of commercials, it became throw a vignette on everything and call it a day. You know, just make it look beautiful and then throw a vignette on. And those were the days when we were lucky to have 2, maybe 4 power windows total. If you were really happening, you had 6 power windows. And so nowadays, the time where you can have unlimited power windows, the potential for power and the potential for going crazy and spending, you know, an hour on every shot gets a little it gets a little
Right.
nutty. But at the same time, I understand, you know, people got to work the way they want to work. So anyway, so that's a node that I have just for vignettes. I don't use it all the time. I tend to use it on wide shots, especially if I feel like there was some light that the DP couldn't control. He just had some spill, and there was no place to put a cutter or a flag in there because there was no place to hide it.
Right.
So I'll take it on my own to just kind of maybe barn door it down a little bit just to try to help them out. Just like we're doing here. So again, it's subtle, but it's there. Maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. It's a matter of, you know, subjective choice. The last row of fixed node tree windows I have is this one. And these are sort of the fine tuning at the end of the session nodes. I know some colorists. Walter Volpato has been very vocal about this. He is at eFilm and Deluxe, and Walter has correctly pointed out there is great danger in desaturating nodes. And I'll give you a good example. Over here in the SAT versus SAT versus SAT window, and also the Loom versus SAT windows. These are covered very well in Alexis's Resolve manual, but I want to warn people the tendency for artifacts to come in when you are not paying attention is huge. For example, let's say you had a scene where you wanted really clean blacks, you wanted absolute black and no contamination in them. So you did a little roll off here and moved the curve down so that you were sucking out the saturation from just the blacks. The problem with that, and Alexis, I don't have to tell you this because you know it, there are certain frequencies of colors which are going to be adversely affected by this. For example, a very strong deep red. So you may have set this shot up, it looks fine with the people who are in it now, then somebody walks in with a bright red sweater that's at a certain color frequency, and you look at it and you go, oh my God, it's getting choppy and weird and nasty and has odd artifacts the moment they walk in this scene. So this is a case where Loom versus SAT or SAT versus SAT is not really going to work very well.
So if I can add here one thing that I
Sure.
find myself doing, because I've certainly seen that, is I like using Loom versus SAT to duck saturation, but I never take it all the way down to 0. That I've found preserves the utility of the tool.
I'll tell you what I do, and I'll reveal a secret. I'll reveal a couple of secrets. The first thing I do is when I do desat sometimes, in order to get the softest, least objectionable reduction in chroma, I'll pull a soft key qualifying just the blackest parts of the image. Sure, I could do it, but that'll drag the show out till 9
Right.
o'clock. But so I'll just do a Luma only thing. Let's see here, this way. Very, very tricky for me. Oh, I hid the window. We're going to edit this part out of the show. There we go.
Fine.
Yeah. See, again, I'm powerless without a control surface. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so if I was doing this, so now I'm just trying to target the softest blacks in the whole thing, and we'll kind of dick with the softness parameters a little bit and maybe add a little bit of denoise. Now that's kind of a gross example, but it'll at least communicate the idea. And you can tweak clean whites and clean blacks. By the way, I know you've told this to people before. Don't think that clean white just affects the whites. It does not. It affects the targeted value that you're selecting, and people.
It's the matte. So it's the white part of
that's
the matte.
Right. We're really adjusting the matte. That's correct. So so once you do that, then we would run back to saturation, or if you had a panel, the saturation knob, and then start pulling this down. And I usually tend to go to about half. So if 50 is normal, maybe I'll go to 25, maybe I'll go to 30. There is no magic number. It's whatever works. It's a very minor change. In fact, I can't see the thing changing at all.
But you're just trying to lose saturation in those deepest, darkest shadows.
Just a little bit of ugliness in there. And of course, you might actually use it for another purpose. Let's say you had a show where they said, we want to go for kind of a cyan black look throughout this entire thing. Maybe you would target the blackest parts of the picture and then purposely introduce a cyan or cold look to it, and that way you might be able to keep it very, very consistent across the project. That's a huge struggle, but it can be done if you work at it. And again, this is a node you can use or turn off, depending on what you're trying to do. The next node in the fixed node structure I have is blacks. I tend to adjust blacks at the end. If I'm looking at something like this again is kind of a gross example. I might drop just the blacks about, let's say I was going about that far. So I'm just
giving yourself a little more density.
And I might play with high range and low range to figure out what part of the signal I'm compressing. And I might not use it at all. I might say, you know what, we were fine where we were before I went crazy. I don't really need to do that.
But that's a separate thing you can turn on and off.
Yes, and that is the advantage of all this, which I'm about to get to. The next node, and we're getting close to the end, is what I call the highlight clip mode. And in effect, this is kind of my legalizing spot where I worry about, is this going to pass QC? Are we going to hear from the boys in the back where they're watching this with a microscope and look at the vector scopes and the waveform monitors and everything? So I think this is the correct knob. I never use the GUI. So
I know. Don't worry about it.
But what I'll do is I'll use soft clip, so that if I have something smashed up at 100, I still call the scopes 100 to 0, being an old video guy, even though I know it's 1023 to 0. And if I see something up there that's kind of looking, for lack of a better word, I'd call it digital ugly. Something it's kind of harsh and, what they call it in audio is harsh and strident.
Okay.
Something a little piercing. So I'll use it to take the edge off a really big specular highlight. And I'll just roll it off gracefully with the highlight soft clip.
And I will just point out to the audience right now that the reason that's at the very end is because that's one of the few operations in Resolve that permanently discards data. After you
Yes.
use those controls, it doesn't matter that it's 32-bit float. You have just thrown away everything above that. Period. End of
Yes,
story.
and in fact, I would look at the entire node tree, and you'll see everything tries to build on what came before it,
Mhm.
and you have to be very conscious of that. I've seen some really screwy node tree structures before, where they'll try to put a key very early on in this, and I'll warn them. I'll go, man, you're really squashing and stretching the signal after this, and it could really affect the quality of the key, or it could change the result of the key in a way that you're not going to like. And they go, hey, you know what? If I see that, I'll just fix it.
Mhm.
And I think, well, I would rather it get fixed before it's a real problem. The final node I have here, and this is just a very standard 18 node tree that I have used before on similar projects. This is just the all-encompassing trim node, or as you might call it, the director has changed his mind node.
Okay.
And again, I will bow to Walter Volpato over at eFilm. He has a wonderful system where he actually came up with 3 parallel nodes near the very end of his extensive node tree. And he has 1 node for the director, 1 node for the cinematographer, and yes, even a node for the producer, which is typically a studio executive.
Mhm.
And the reason for doing that is in review sessions, and a lot of features get reviewed constantly, especially if the people come in one at a time, and the DP, let's say, is with you and says, what the hell is this? Why are the highlights now blue? And you look and you say, oh yeah, the producer wanted that. Let me show you this on and off. And he'll throw his hands up and say, all right, well, if that's what he wants, at least we know where it came from.
Mhm.
And then we may also get into a tug of war where between the director, the cinematographer, and the producer, they have to decide who has control of the picture. And as you can imagine, that kind of leads to some ugly political situations.
Mhm.
The good news is with a fixed node tree, you have the ability to demonstrate the on and off nature of the correction. You can say, hey, do you hate what the producer did? And they said, yeah, I'm overruling the producer. I'm standing up. I'm going to threaten to walk off this picture, turn every one of his changes off. Boom. We can do that in one fell swoop
Nice.
with a what do you call it? Oh God, it's up here. With a ripple change. Thank you. A ripple node
right.
change.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we could just turn that node off and then apply that 0 correction all the way through. Now, when I do a very destructive operation like that, when I'm saying take every node in this project and change it to nothing, or blow it out, or make it all green, if I'm doing something that's really potentially disastrous, I will make a copy of the timeline first.
Okay.
And then I will change the copy of the timeline. And if that is now our new timeline, then and only then, maybe I'll make a copy of the project and delete the original timeline. So now this is the one and true only timeline. The
Final.
Yeah, revised. The now what I want to say is the advantage. I can think of 2 or 3 advantages of fixed node trees. Number one, if you're tired and working long hours and falling out of your chair, which is my typical mode of working, you can look up at a glance and go, where the hell did I make her face brighter? And then you go, oh yeah, that's right, node number 3. Yeah. And so it kind of points the direction of where you do things. And if you keep this consistent with every project that you do, it becomes more second nature to kind of dissect your thinking on a particular project. Another very important situation is, let's say you did a project back in 2017. 3 years later, the client comes back to you and says, oh, you know what? We finally sold our movie to a distributor, but we're going to make some changes. We have some additions. We have a new conform. We have this, we have that. Can you pull up that old session? And you can say, sure, great idea. Let's do that. You pull up the old session. If all of your nodes are neatly arranged and identified, labeled, and structured in a logical way, you can say, oh, great, I know what I did. I can fix this and I can apply the same looks to new material.
And that's something that can't be overemphasized is
Yeah.
I know it's tempting for a lot of people who are new to think, God, labeling my nodes, that's just time I don't want to spend. I know what I'm doing. It's fine. But
Well,
when you come back, even a month later, you're
oh
going to be
yeah.
glad you took the time to label those nodes so you know what the hell is going on.
Well, and the third reason to do this is if you have to hand off this project to somebody else, if there are two colorists working on a movie, let's say Sam is working on reels 1, 2, and 3, and Joe is working on reels 4, 5, and 6. But if they're using the exact same node structure, they can look over each other's shoulders. So when the project is put together at the end, they'll each know where the other left off. And they'll say, oh, what did he do here? Oh, I see. Yeah, he did DSAT over here in node 15. Okay, I understand. Okay. So it's kind of a shorthand way of communicating with the other guy. And remember, as far as this taking time, here's the secret of prefab, whatever you want to call them, node trees. The secret is I keep a half a dozen or more power grades of pre-built fixed node trees
of different kinds,
which basically have nothing in them. So the structure is already there, the positions are already there, the labels are already there. All I have to do when I start the project is bang, I pop that power grade in. I come up with a reasonable look for the first few scenes, and then boom, I apply that to the entire project or the entire reel, however I'm working. So don't think I'm messing around and building these nodes one at a time and painstakingly labeling them and know that. No, my goal is from the moment the client hands me the footage and the moment the conform is deemed good and I can start working, I want to be color correcting 5 minutes later. If I can't do that in 5 minutes, something is wrong. And that includes coming up with a reasonable look, and that includes coming up with the setup and the node structure and all that other stuff so that I can be as fast and efficient as possible. I want to give credit where credit is due. The first time I heard about fixed node structures probably came from Company 3. When Resolve started taking over from DaVinci 2K, which is the ancient predecessor of Resolve, that was a hardware software system instead of a software only system. Everybody kind of ran around in circles and sort of did their own thing. We at Technicolor heard through the grapevine, the Company 3 guys kind of have their own patented method for doing things. And the supervisors in charge kind of deemed you can work anywhere you want, but for efficiency and for speed, we suggest you use this kind of method. So they came up with a fixed node tree structure that seemed to work for a lot of the things they did. I have worked on projects, you mentioned documentaries before. When I do documentaries, I do a much more simplified version of this node tree for the simple reason is that we don't have any time.
Right.
So I mean, if we've got, I don't know, 2 or 3 days to do maybe 2,000 cuts, we may just not have the luxury to start tweaking multiple nodes and doing all that stuff.
I ran into the same thing doing reality TV, right, where I'd have 1,200 cuts a day, and it's like, I'm having a brutally efficient node tree, and that's the way I'm working.
And I have to say, I know high-end feature colorists, I know mid-level feature colorists, I know the guys at the bottom of the heap who are just struggling to stay alive, and I know people who just do music videos and commercials and all of that. And there are some, especially at the high end, who kind of look down their nose at reality people. I say reality shows are among the hardest work there is that's out there. It's very, very challenging. I've done my share of it. I've done some really big reality projects. I've done some documentaries that were essentially reality. And by the end of the session, my fingers were bloody and bruised.
Yeah.
Because I had gone through so many shots and hit the nodes, hit the buttons so hard, and just whacked my way through it. Again,
well,
going back to
and I usually tell people that really most reality shows are basically documentary. You know, there's a lot of available light. There's a high shot count. The edits are dense, and you know, like many documentaries, you don't know when you're going to get that amazing interview or that thing happening, and it's not necessarily beautifully lit. And so your job, you got to make all of that work, every single bit of it.
And what I have to say is there are documentaries out there that get massive audiences and also look really beautiful, and they do some interesting things in them. Have you seen the Netflix Tiger King?
I haven't seen that
documentary.
Yet. I haven't seen that yet.
Oh my God! I mean, it was the #1 show in America for several weeks, and it's one of those horrible train wrecks that you can't take your eyes off of.
So I've heard.
And I heard so much about it. I said what I usually say, which is, well, I'll try one show, but I bet it's no good and really sleazy and awful, and I won't be able to stand it, and I'll probably turn it off after 10 minutes. And the next thing I knew, 2 days later, I had blown through all 6 or 7 shows because it is riveting to see the depths of humanity and how horrible and crazy and eccentric people can be. And I mean, you can go into the message of animal abuse, and you can go into the whole thing of people who are high on drugs and people who are just out of their mind, eccentric and all of that. But it works on many, many levels. And it also tells a story. And it's also very fast moving, beautifully edited, and the color is fantastic. They did a great job. About the only place where it falls down is they use some archival footage, which is not great. But I could see that's always the challenge in documentaries and reality shows. They grab old standard def videotape from the 90s or the early 2000s.
You get an old VHS tape, and that's what you got, and that's it, right? That's the only image of the thing.
That's all there is, and they just have to make do. But the bulk of the show looks great, and I could see they did some very tricky things with. I love working with interviews where you're trying hard to make the interview guy look interesting, and you're using defocus and depth of field and a little slash of light in the background and all that stuff. And you may think that's a lot of trouble, and it takes a lot of time. And I've actually had clients caution me. They go, hey, listen, we don't have a lot of time to mess around with that stuff. And I'll say, not a problem. Every day, every time we get back to John here, I'm going to grab that as a stored grade, as a gallery grade. So that will be John's look. And I will not have to start from scratch and do this defocus nonsense and slash of light and yada, yada, yada. So when you get good with that, which is, again, fixed node tree, good control surface, and just the necessity of working quickly, you can do that kind of thing. Or you have another situation. Let's say you have an actor of a certain age who has some age lines and some wrinkles and maybe not the best of makeup and all that stuff, and you can have a pre-built node tree that takes care of her problems. I say her, it could be a guy. It always kills me when I see a really famous actor or actress of bygone days, and I look at them and I go, oh my God, they just look like hell. I wish they could have spent another minute or two on them to give them what I call a touch of glamour. I try not to call them defocus nodes or skin dewrinkling nodes or anything like that. I'll say, let's put a glamour node on her to make her the best she can be. And I've done that kind of thing. And the director goes, my God, you've shaved off 15 years. And I go, that's what we're here for.
Well, and
if I can make her do that, that's great.
My philosophy for that is I want to do what a talented makeup artist would have been able to do, but was not able to do for whatever reason. Because that's the problem. Is they were moving too fast, or there wasn't the budget, or whatever. Yeah. So hey,
and what I would
up.
say, just to wrap this up,
Okay.
one way I do this, and I don't have any power grades at the moment, but you can see my screen has shifted. And what I would do in that particular situation, like over here, oh, I can't move that. I wish I could move that. If I could move that, you see over here this OFX node.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would do is I would have a stored grade. I would open up that node tree, or the displayed gallery still would just have one thing in it,
Mm-hmm.
which might be face refinement, or it might be a custom shape just of that person's face. And I would drag that over and drop that on top of that node just to get us going quickly.
To copy it into that node. Yeah.
Exactly.
And by the
again,
way, there's also a way you can drag a whole node tree onto a node. I forget what the keyboard modifier is, but it becomes a compound node.
Yeah,
so you can actually have a family of 5 nodes working together inside of one node, occupying that same spot.
There are some great tricks with the advanced panel that save time, and possibly my favorite, kind of an undocumented feature, is the one where you can recall a gallery still and then apply that grade to the image you're sitting on, the shot you're sitting on at the moment. And I think that is play still and then shift play still.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that one from Rohit Gupta, who popped up on one of the forums and said, "Oh yeah, we've got that feature. We just forgot to write it down." and that's one of those things where if you have, a shot of Sally and a shot of Joe, and a shot of Sally and a shot of Joe, and you can bop back and forth to, stills that way, and it can be very, very quick that way.
Mm-hmm.
Anything I can do to shave a little time off my session helps.
Completely.
I think the fixed node trees, I'm guessing, save me 20 or 30 minutes a day, which doesn't sound like much, but it does add up. And then I would say the control service saves me an additional 20 or 30 minutes a day. So in an average 40, 45, 50-hour week, I'm getting back at least 8 hours, sometimes 10 hours of extra time because of all the stuff these little tricks I use to try to move a little faster. Unfortunately, the reality of the business is I don't get to go home 10 hours early, or I don't get to take a day off. What that usually means is it gives me more time to perfect the grades I already have.
Right.
So I start going in on a surgical level.
You get to grade more shots.
Yeah. Now we're going down to the microscopic level. Every eyeball is going to get its own node.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, hey, I have taken up far too much of your time. We've gone way overboard, but you know what?
I'm so sorry.
No. Don't be sorry. I love these conversations. This is why
great.
I started doing this. So please, everyone, give a big hand online to Marc Wielage for joining us.
Send money. And I should also provide a reference for anybody who is interested in learning more about fixed node trees. Mark Todd Osborne, who I know has been a guest on your show. Mark published a wonderful dissertation on Shane Hurlbut, who is a renowned cinematographer, on his website. He showed his node tree, and Walter Volpato, who I mentioned before, has been very free with information on the way he works, and he has some very elaborate node structures that he uses on major A-list projects, like some of the Star Wars films and quite a few films for Roland Emmerich, and some very, very big directors and things like that. There's also a Canadian colorist, and I hope I can pronounce his name correctly, Benoit Cote. And Benoit is a frequent contributor to the Lift Gamma Gain forum, and he has published some of his node trees, which will cross your eyes and just make you, stunned. Is it okay if I reveal some bits?
You know what? I wanna keep colorists to presenting their own stuff. So
all right. Okay, then
So
then
I'll just leave it.
I just wanted to show you that 60 or 70 node tree thing, which just looked like a traffic jam. And I look at stuff like that and I go, oh my God, how many hours are in the day?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if I have 300 or 400 shots to do and I start doing the math and I think,
You know,
well,
as you said,
basically I have 2 minutes a shot at most.
As you said, you can get fast doing almost anything, and that's something I had a fencing coach tell me. He said you can learn the wrong technique, but if you drill it enough, you will be fast doing that particular cut. And it's all about the drilling, and I've seen that be true in so many aspects of life. You can be fast at almost any workflow. It's just a matter of, you know, drilling with it and being consistent, and, you know, how sore are your wrists at the end of the day.
Well,
Really.
that's very true. That's very true. And I mean, you could probably do an entire show on just the number of bad habits that you've seen your students get into. And I yesterday when Alexis and I were talking, I mentioned a nightmare session I had to take over for somebody else, where the colorist, who was very well intentioned, had started his node tree with 3 LUTs in a row. And I was in shock, and and they had given the job to me because the distributor looked at it and said, this is unreleasable. There is something wrong with this picture, but we don't know what it is. You know, the scopes are legal, but the picture just looks terrible. And I looked at it and I said, my God, why did you put 3 LUTs in a row? And the DP said, is that wrong? And I said, well, yeah, that's kind of crazy. And I said, why? Tell me your philosophy here. And he said, well, the first LUT was to kind of put the picture in a normal space. And the second LUT was to get the picture to look interesting, to give it some style. And then the LUT after that was to kind of pull back a little bit and not go as far. And I said, let me show you something. And I threw all that away. I blew it away. I think we had like 4 nodes. We only had time for 4 on that session. And I just whipped around the controls. We A-B'd the image. And he said, oh, wow, this looks exactly the same, only better. And I said, exactly. Now we're not stressing out the image. It's a little more natural. It's not as harsh. And I did it without LUTs. I'm famous as the guy online who screams no LUTs. But the truth is, I will use a custom-made LUT when it's precisely tailored for a specific image, and the DP is in love with that, and it's what they've used for dailies and all of that other stuff.
And on that note, I'm gonna cut you off.
Oh yeah, please.
Give you the hook. Remember, folks, don't stress out the image.
Correct.
Thank you, Mark.
Not a problem.
And thanks everyone for attending. This was an epic one and really fun. So I think people are gonna have fun with this episode. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you.